Hello and welcome. You are watching Middle East Matters on France 24. I'm Nadia Massih. In the show today, Israel's invasion of Lebanon. Over 1 million displaced, the Israeli army pushing deeper into Lebanese territory. What's the endgame? A new occupation? An attempt by Israel to capitalise on a weakened Hezbollah? And what of the Lebanese army? What role can it play as Lebanon's sovereignty is once again violated by its southern neighbour? Well, we will discuss all of that in a few minutes with my guest, Yezid Sayigh from the Carnegie Middle East Centre. But before we do, let's look at this report from France 24's Emerald Maxwell on Israel's long, checkered history in Lebanon.
For residents of southern Lebanon, Israeli troops on their doorsteps are a familiar sight. A cycle of displacement, death and destruction stretching back decades. Once again, Israel says it will occupy southern Lebanon to the Litani River, a border long coveted by hardliners.
Beyond the defeat of the terrorist organisation Hezbollah, the Litani River must be our new border with the state of Lebanon.
Israel's last occupation of the area began in June 1982. When it sent troops in to expel the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO, operating on Lebanese soil. It also sought to install a pro-Israel, Maronite Christian government and laid siege to the capital, Beirut. The result was devastating, the deadliest Israeli assault on Lebanon to date, carried out with the help of local Christian militias.
The Lebanese people was in a bad situation, but was not able to do it alone.
Israel succeeded in forcing the PLO out of Lebanon, but its invasion also gave rise to Hezbollah, a militant group funded and trained by Iran as a resistance movement against Israel, recruited from Lebanon's Shia Muslim community, the country's most economically marginalized group. Israel pulled back from central Lebanon in 1983, but established a formal occupation zone in southern Lebanon, about 15 kilometers deep, for nearly 2 decades. During that time, Hezbollah built its military capacity, with weapons mostly funneled through Syria from Iran. It also built civilian and welfare infrastructure, embedding itself deeply in Lebanese society. Israel tried in vain to uproot it, launching offensives in Lebanon in 1993 and 1996. In 2000, facing sustained attacks and mounting casualties, the Israeli army withdrew from southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah claimed that it alone was capable of defending the country.
This is the most beautiful day of our lives. We couldn't believe it when we were told we could cross the barricades.
6 years later, Hezbollah crossed the border, killing 8 Israeli soldiers and capturing 2, triggering a 5-week war. Israel launched airstrikes and sent its forces back into southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah responded with rocket fire. At least 1,200 Lebanese and 158 Israelis were killed. But Israel did not achieve its objectives, and Hezbollah declared it a divine victory. The day after the October 7th attacks on Israel, Hezbollah joined in. So began nearly a year of tit-for-tat strikes, until Israel's coordinated attack on Hezbollah's pages and its assassination of the group's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. A ceasefire was signed in November 2024, but Lebanon's government failed to rein in the group, which then in 2026 waded into the US-Israeli war with its ally Iran by firing rockets at Israeli positions. Israel has vowed to finish the job of dismantling Hezbollah and says it will keep control over a swathe of southern Lebanon even after its ground offensive ends.
And here we are again, Israel once again pushing deep into the south of Lebanon. Yezid Sayigh with us now, watching that report. And Yezid, look, as we saw there, Israel has quite literally been here before. This time around, what would you say Israel's strategy is? What's the endgame?
Well, I believe the endgame, to the extent that there is a clear one, and that is not certain, is not only to force the complete disarmament of Hezbollah by the Lebanese government and army, but also, I believe, to dismantle Hezbollah entirely as a political and social movement. Now, that, of course, is a much harder task, and it's not clear that this is attainable. And here's where other factors come in, one of which is domestic politics in Israel, A lot of what we hear in the media is, quoting the defense minister, who is not apparently regarded well within the military circles as knowing much about, defense and military affairs. And to a large extent, what he's doing is undertaking political theater for the domestic audience ahead of elections later this year in Israel. And there's also, I think, the attempt to fill the gap between the real goals or unattainable goals on the one side, which go beyond disarming Hezbollah, as I said, to filling time, as it were, with highly visible military action, big threats of dramatic things to be done to Lebanon and the Lebanese. So there's a lot of political theater here, which is not to dismiss that there are also military objectives and that there's, real death and destruction being rained on the people of South Lebanon and of Beirut in particular, but simply to say that there's a lot more to this than meets the eye.
Yeah, and as you say, we mustn't discount the civilian impact of all of this. We're talking about already 1 million people forced to leave their homes, over 1,000 people killed. You mentioned Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz. It's interesting what you say there, that apparently he's not that well regarded in military circles in Israel, but he has been speaking a lot to the press. And to that end, I would actually just like to play a soundbite. We can have a listen to what he's had to say about Lebanon recently.
The return south of more than 600,000 residents of southern Lebanon who evacuated north will be totally prohibited until the security of northern residents is ensured and secured.
So Israel Katz there, Yezid, saying that actually there's going to be about 600,000 Lebanese people who aren't, in his view, returning to their homes anytime soon. Does that sound to you like a sort of repeat of what we saw in Gaza, the mass displacement of people away from Israel's borders?
There's some superficial resemblance in the sense of inflicting massive damage on civilians in order to pursue political goals, and also for the national leadership of Israel, i.e. the government of Israel, to show itself as tough and determined to its own domestic public. So there's more of the politics, but I think there's a fundamental difference between how Israel approached Gaza militarily and what it's doing in Lebanon. That is, that in Gaza, there was a readiness to keep expanding the military operation, going from airstrikes initially and a lot of bombardment to the entry of ground forces into almost the entirety of Gaza on the ground. This is something we don't expect to see in Lebanon, because even if the Israeli army enters in much greater force than it has done so far, reaches the Litani River, which is up to 40 kilometers away from the border between Lebanon and Israel, there's a whole lot more of Lebanon in which Hezbollah remains, and where the Israeli army is, I think, for all sorts of reasons, very unlikely to go. So we have there already a different situation. And in Lebanon, I think the primary sort of military political tactic of Israel is to bring mounting pressure on the Lebanese government to the point where it orders the Lebanese army into direct action against Hezbollah to disarm it by force. And this is something that the Lebanese government has been reluctant to do, and the Lebanese army command is reluctant to do, because they're both afraid of splits within their ranks, and of course of basically waging a civil war against an entire community within Lebanon. But Israel's strategy here is to make the Lebanese side do the rest of the job for Israel, which is not what it tried to do in the case of Hamas and Gaza.
Well, let's talk a little bit more then about the kind of the internal complexity within Lebanon when it comes to Hezbollah. Is it correct to say that it's effectively impossible for the Lebanese army to consider trying to dismantle Hezbollah, an organization that's often been seen as much more powerful than the army itself, while you have Israel pushing deeper into the country?
Well, this is very much a matter of subjective assessment. It's anybody's guess whether the Lebanese army would remain united and retain its cohesion, or break apart along sectarian lines as it did in the 1970s and 1980s, in which Christian or Maronite-led versus Sunni Muslim or Shia Muslim-led units broke away and joined armed factions on those two sides. So there is a fear that that could happen again. That's at least some Lebanese army units or soldiers might defect to Hezbollah, or at least refuse to fire on, certainly on Shia areas. And there's this tremendous paradox here that, the expectation that the Lebanese army might actually take on Hezbollah, which basically means taking on a large part of the Lebanese population, the Shia community, entering into Shia majority areas. If by force, then what are they going to do? Shell their own citizens? And of course, all of this is, let's remember, all of this is in aid of a government in Israel that is busy annexing the West Bank, has just committed what many regard as genocide in Gaza, is pursuing racist policies at home towards its own Palestinian citizens. So, if you look at the wider picture, it's not as if Hezbollah is simply a rogue rebel group that is outlawed in Lebanon or that Israel doesn't like. I mean, there's a lot more behind what Israel wants in Lebanon, and that is ultimately to anchor what it's doing in the West Bank and Gaza and make those new realities unassailable. So for Lebanon, just to come back to the starting point, the Lebanese government has offered direct talks with Israel to reach permanent security arrangements. All of this, of course, against the Lebanese government's declaration immediately after Hezbollah fired the first rockets against Israel on March 2, that Hezbollah, its military activities are banned, are illegal. It must surrender its weapons. So there's a political process here which could end up in the Lebanese government and army asserting some level of authority, but that won't come in direct confrontation with Hezbollah for all these reasons. It might take more the form of, say, the Lebanese army deploying in an area between the Litani River and north of that to the Zahrani River, an area, in other words, that will come next under pressure from Israel, but where the Lebanese army could deploy in force, making it clear that it is the Lebanese army and the sovereign state, not Hezbollah, that will now hold these areas outside of the declared Israeli security zone.
We don't have very much time left, unfortunately, but I do want to ask you one final brief question, if I may. With this mass displacement of Lebanese people that we've seen, most of them are Shia from the south of Lebanon, moving to other parts of the country. And there has been a school of thought that says that it's another deliberate Israeli tactic to move Shia communities into majority Sunni or majority Christian parts of the country, and thus sort of sowing sectarian discord in a country that's obviously seen so much of that. Do you think that's part of the calculus here?
I think there's a definite sectarian element to how Israel perceives Lebanon, just as it perceives Iran today and seeks to stoke various ethnicities into armed rebellion against the Iranian regime. There are differences, of course, but in the case of Lebanon, we've had a pattern over the last 2 years of Israeli Air Force strikes against individual persons or families, Shia people sheltering in Christian areas, and often on spurious claims of there being senior Hezbollah commanders. I'm aware of at least one case where this was completely false. And I think that was a deliberate attempt to prompt non-Shia areas to close their areas off to refugees and displaced persons from the Shia community or from other areas. So there is an attempt to foment polarization and fear, and that is backed up by the deliberate targeting of paramedics and medical facilities, of journalists. This is, again, a tactic we've seen in Gaza, which is to remove the basic sense of security that Lebanese and other civilians in Lebanon, Palestinian refugees, Syrian refugees, and so on, have, that if they're hurt, they've got a refuge, someone will take care of them, someone will take them to hospital, and so on. So there's an attempt to wage basically psychological warfare, a part of which is sectarian polarization.
Really good to get your analysis. Unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions, but thank you very much indeed, Yezid Sayigh, talking to us there from the Carnegie Middle East Centre. And with that, you have been watching Middle East Matters here on France 24's Around the World.